what is there to be delivered and to ask what is there to ask. So let's all assume our attitude of prayer. O great and eternal wise God, Father God, time, dear God, that we are in the land of the living. For you have kept us, O God, through all the changing scenes of life, in trouble and in joy. And our praises must continue, O God, this morning. Father God, in spite of, but because of who you are, we stand in the gap for those, Heavenly Father, who cannot stand for themselves. Father God, this morning as we assemble here as individuals first, to receive, dear God, what is delivered, dear God, I ask that you open up our hearts and our minds to be transparent, dear God, to accept and to learn or to understand what is delivered, dear God, this morning. Father God, we want to bless the executive of this organization, dear God, the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, who see it fit, dear God, to equip the membership, dear God, with the right tools, the right information, dear God, to deal with the situation over there, dear God. Father God, you have put people in charge to run the affairs of the people, dear God, not to manage the people. And they are doing all sorts of things, dear God, this morning. But in the name of your most high Son, Jesus, dear God, we ask that you continue to bless, you continue to educate, you continue to support, dear God, for we must be consistent in our fight going forward, dear God. I ask that our hearts and our minds, dear God, not be selfish, dear God. Let us not think about just today or what has happened tomorrow, but what is to come in the future. For their children, their nieces, their nephews, their neighbors, dear God. For if we do not provide for them today, they will look to take what we have tomorrow. And Father God, as we have, all these people here at the head table facilitating today, dear God, we ask that they deliver, transparently, dear God. We ask that they don't deliver what they want, but what is right. And what is needed. What is exact? That we will have the right information, that will not be contradicted, dear God, when we decide to challenge those of the status quo, dear God. And Father God, this morning again, I ask that you enter into our presence, dear God. And anything, dear God, that is uncommon or unseemly, unacceptable, God, of you, O God, we ask that you be the tendency part. Every organ, every artery, dear God, anything seen or known, anything unknown, we ask that you have the blueprint, dear God, to deal with it, dear God. And we ask that you soothe our hearts and our minds, dear God. Those who are about to come, we ask that you give them traveling mercies, dear God, that you reach here safe, dear God. And may we be attentive, dear God, and supportive. In your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen, amen, and amen.
Thank you, Comrade Wright, for that very powerful prayer. All of us, because we're talking about the national resources of Trinidad and Tobago, and as patriotic citizens, I would like for all of us to sing the national anthem. keep on struggling until we white union makes us. We start a program at the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. Comrades, have your seats. And powerful singing of the patriotic union songs. This morning is going to be a very interesting morning as we partner now an annual event with Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, TTEITI, in bringing to you critical information concerning the national resources of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, having been to a few forums, I recognize that there seemed to be a sort of misunderstanding when it comes to the ownership. So I think in the halls of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, we always stand proud to claim and proclaim over and over again that the national resources of Trinidad and Tobago belongs to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I will not waste any time further. I want us to get straight into the program. But as we do that, I just want to lay one quick foundation. You see, unlike some politicians, even some of the technocrats and those in industry, they call them captains of industry, we are very clear that our position with regards to the energy sector is grounded on a foundation, an ideological foundation, and that is resource nationalism. And that idea is simply that the resources cannot be exploited for a few. The resources, if it belongs to all of us, has to be exploited for all of us and not in the interest of a few. So we are very clear of our foundation. But to get into even more details, it is really my pleasure to introduce what we can consider, we have it here on the program as opening remarks, but I would like to call it a bit a keynote address. Because we are going to hear with absolute clarity not just the union's position, we are at the vanguard, yes, but the trade union movement's position as we talk about the energy sector. So, bringing a keynote address here for you this morning is none other than the President General of the Blue Shirt Army of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union and also President of the Joint Trade Union Movement, Comrade.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ozzy. And comrades, good morning. Morning, comrades. Morning. You gotta sound like if you own something, you know. Morning, comrades. Morning. That's what we're talking about. Let me first start by recognizing persons here at the head table. A sister, Ms. Nazira Abdul Hag, from the Secretariat of Trinidad and Tobago Extractive Industries Transparency Initiatives, and also Mr. Sherwin Long, and he was arguing just a while ago, when will he get conferred upon him the title comrade? He having been here for, what, the last 2, 3, or 4 years, a regular staple in our forum. It doesn't come easy, and when you get it, you need to wear it with pride and honor, and that will be soon, comrade. Mr. Sherwin Long, head of the TTEITI Secretariat. Comrades from the Joint Trade Union Movement with here this morning, comrades from the Amalgamated Workers Union, comrades from the Banking and Insurance General Workers Union, BEGO, Maxi Taxi Association, the Postal Workers Union, Steel Workers Union. Who else is here? That's it for now. And members of civil society organization, yeah. And of course, members of the media. And specially invited guests who took the time to be with here this morning. And let me also recognize our General Secretary at the head table, and of course, the chairman for this morning's proceedings. And not forgetting our soldiers of this formidable army, soldiers of the Blue Shirt Army, members of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union here this morning. And let's welcome everybody to what ought to be a very interesting discussion that would, at the end of the day, have us resolve to do more, much more, in terms of the education of the general public who are not here this morning, but who are also the beneficiaries of what we are discussing today. Comrades, good morning and welcome. There's a saying that the assets of the country, these assets that we are trying to define and claim ownership to rightfully this morning, these assets don't belong to us. There's one school of thought that says these assets belongs to the future generation, and that we, the present generation, we have them in our trust and care to ensure that we manage them in a way in which they would be beneficial to future generations, the generation that is yet to come, so that we are only loaned these assets. That's one school of thought. But I think that level of thinking permits simply because the belief, the philosophy of ownership of these assets ought to resonate with us as a sense of belonging. Now, if you have something in your trust for your children or for the future generation, you ought to take extreme care of that. And if those in the past would have taken care of these assets, we are today recipients of what they took care of. And so once we continue with that approach, we can see where everybody will benefit. But for us today to really appreciate what we are talking about, the man in the street, those who are at school, the young, the youth, those who are employed, those who are unemployed, for them to understand what we are talking about, we need to explain the value of these assets for everybody to appreciate. And so the great challenge that we have at the moment, which is not unlike a challenge that we would have had for quite a while, is that there's a disconnect with those who own these assets and the knowledge that they own these assets. Now picture this. Your grandfather or your parents or some auntie or uncle leave some land, a whole lot of land, not one lot, a whole lot of land for you, acres of arable land. But you don't know that that land belonged to you. You certainly would not appreciate that. You might be very well driving up and down every day past those acres of land, not knowing that that land belonged to you, and therefore not being able to have access for the land to do things for you, to benefit you and your family. So your lifetime will pass and you would not utilize that land simply because you don't know. And then there are those who might know but don't appreciate that this land was left for them. And therefore, they might give it away, have it sold cheaply. But really, because they do not appreciate the value of that, whither goes that land? And therefore, we want to first start by saying to all of Trinidad and Tobago, this land here, Trinidad and Tobago, every spot of ground, every acreage, every square foot belongs to every one of us, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. All of these assets that government come and government go, take under their control, do as they please, and give to who they please, however they please, at whatever cost and whatever consequence to the people, all of that belongs to the people. So when you talk about energy sector for far too long in the minds of the average man in the street is something in abstract, something that some big Sawati or some big technocrat will talk about on some forum or on the TV, but that had nothing to do with him. Energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago, resources both offshore and onshore, they are totally oblivious as to how that connect to their current conditions of living, the ability of the same government to afford you resources of one kind or another, and how if you put that in the hands of a few, how you would have lost all of those benefits. So when they are starved of resources from community to community, which has to do whether it be bad roads, and we today apparently like we're in a bad road era. There's no road good here in the country. So all of the communities throughout Trinidad and Tobago would cry out for good roads. So whether it has to do with poor health care system, that you go to the hospital this morning, and if you are lucky, you can come out alive tomorrow morning. You haven't been attended to sometime 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, and that's your reality, because there's not enough resources to provide enough beds and medication and so on. Or that the school, the education system, where they want to currently remove gate. And so you have to everybody, from whatever cardinal point of the country, wherever he or she, this youth comes from, they have to pay their way fully. And if they don't, well, whither goes their education that would have been afforded to them? Or whether it have to do with the escalating out-of-control crime situation, where resources are apportioned for national security, to make the country safe, a responsibility that the government continues to abdicate and tell everybody else it's their responsibility. But are the resources to go to these areas of governance? All of these resources come from somewhere. And the less they have to allocate to these areas would mean more hardship to those who can least afford. And if you have the revenue streams coming from that important sector, and by the way, let's remind ourselves that we are still an oil and gas economy, and therefore we must pay even more close attention to this sector, where the revenue stream comes from. Let's remind ourselves of that. If we are not careful, there will be less and less for the country, for the average citizen, the man in the street. And that those who are right now, the sick in the hospital, the sick and the infirm, the elderly, the pensioners, the retirees, the maxi-taxi drivers and owners, the vagrant on the street, the youth, the born and unborn, our children, all of us, we are entitled to a say as to what they do with these assets. But there's another school of thought embraced by all governments, past and present, which says that these assets don't really belong to the people, you know. These assets belong to who? The government, whichever government in control, for them to do as they please. And very often, especially with this one, of course not excluding the past governments, you would find them, having been given control of governance through our democratic procedure and elections and so on, they would more likely than not find ways to give these assets to to their friends and financiers, their family, and of course, in this case, to them, their ever-loving 1%. So when we guard jealously, which we ought to be guarding jealously, these assets, what in fact you do is to understand that you are protecting them for us, our children and future generation. But to be able to do that, you have to understand, you have to know where that land is, understand how much land it is, understand the value of the land, where you could plant on the land and so on, just like the land that your grandfather, grandmother, auntie, uncle, or nenen, or whoever would have left that for you. You have to understand and appreciate it to be able to fight for it. And that is where we feel, we in the OWTU, of course, joined by our comrades in the Joint Trade Union Movement, feel we have responsibility conferred upon us to educate the public about these assets that belongs to them. You would have heard not too long ago, I think it was last year or the year before, time goes so quickly now because of the amount of events that we get involved in from day to day. So it might have been last year or the year before, but it's not too long ago. You would recall, if you think a little bit, the current Minister of Energy, a fellow by the name of Smiley Franklin Khan. And don't let that smile fool you. Every time he smiles, he robs you. He robs you of knowledge of what is yours and otherwise. And you would have heard him say in our nation's parliament, in the Senate, praising up a particular lease operator. I don't know if comrades could recall that. And that particular contractor, lease operator, is the best thing since sliced bread. And that he would have improved on production exponentially by some additional 5,000 barrels or thereabout. The ministers would. Don't hold me to the exact number. But that his was the submission that they are even better than the workers who have the responsibility to produce these assets. And therefore they ought to be given kudos. But he was building an argument for giving them even more, because that is where they were going. And then you would have heard, not too long after, almost going to shock to know that that is happening openly for everybody to see and hear. That same lease operator, contractor, friend of the government, praising the Prime Minister in a public ad, that this government is a good government and they manage well. But they must manage well because they're giving you everything. Some for you, some for you, some for you and they're serving, some for you. So they must manage well. Giving them praises for their competence. Well, of course, we know that performance appraisal is boo because they are not performing. But hand in glove, government and contractor, partner, financer, and so on, in love, right in front of all of us. And then what was revealed later on, don't want to go too much into that because everybody have a lawyer lined up from here to OWTU, simply because they have the people's assets to provide the money to do it. But the point is, you would have heard and seen before your naked eyes revelation pertaining to particular contractors, particular lease operators. The message in there is that we in the OWTU were saying from inception, do not enter into that type of arrangement, because what you are in fact doing, you are giving away what belongs to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We were vindicated because we were saying that they don't produce, they don't do anything better than anybody else. But the public is misled and fooled into believing that the only way the public itself can benefit from these assets, whether it be in the Petroleum situation, the NGC situation, or the offshore environment, all of these assets on the East Coast, all of these blocks that they have, the different types of production sharing contracts and so on, which at the end of the day, these contracts, you are entitled to know the details of those contracts because it is your assets they are entering into arrangements and agreement with. All of those things. We were vindicated simply because we are saying that the lion's share of these assets, they are always given out to private concern and private interest. And when that happens, it is money in the bank, but not money in the bank for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is money in the bank for private interests. And those who were given the authority to govern in the interests of all of us, to look after our interests, would have us believe that our interest is being served by entering into all kinds of questionable arrangements and so on. Indeed, they believe that when they got the constitutional authority to govern, and in this case, September 7, 2015, they believe that they are owners of all they survey and that they can do what they want with these assets and give it out to whoever they want. And at the end of the day, you would end up owning absolutely nothing. We are in a situation today in this country, comrades, we are not unaware or oblivious to the situation where, because we are an oil and gas economy, we depend solely on revenue, major revenue stream coming from the oil and the gas and so on. And of course, that because of the fall in price of oil and commodities, this country revenue earning capacity has shrunken a bit. We are not unaware of that. But we believe that now more than ever, you cannot use this time, because of this challenge, to give away what the people own. Because we will end up at the end of this, when the cycle makes full circle and comes to completion, we will end up as a country owning very little or nothing, and the 1% and others who that type of interest represent will own everything. And so it will be, if it is difficult now for you to be able to access all of these amenities that this revenue stream, your energy sector pays for, it will be impossible then to formulate any argument. And that we must tell them, those in the past, those present, and whomsoever come after, because those who are present are not going to be returned to office. We must say to everyone, consistently as OWTU would have said from time immemorial, some 81 years ago, that these assets belongs to all of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But more than that, the people of Trinidad and Tobago must be prepared to fight for the ownership and control of these assets all of the time for their benefit. It has to be that way. So we are telling you to tell everybody, understand what they are doing, how it will impact you, understand what they are doing to what is yours. And so, comrades, I must mention that even the workers who perform an invaluable task and contribution in that environment, those workers ought to, in the first instance, understand that they make a significant contribution, without which contribution we cannot monetize these assets for people, for everybody to benefit. And therefore, they are entitled to be treated with the highest level, all workers. But my focus now is the energy sector workers. How could it be that this thing is so important, but the workers who perform in that sector, they are treated with callous disregard and disrespect? And that what is happening in the offshore sector, particularly on that East Coast now, is that every Harilal, Betty, Lou, and Joan, and Janice line up to get a piece of the blood, sweat, and tears of the workers, and of course, a piece of those assets at the expense of the workers, of course, in the first instance, and the country. And that the situation as it exists right now is that once they enter into contractual arrangement with the multinationals, first of all, the multinationals believe that that is theirs because of the type of contractual arrangement, and that for the time that they remain in control of those assets, they can do what they want with it. And so part of that arrangement is to employ what we describe as service provider and labor service contract and so on, and to get the cheapest nobody who can get a few workers to go outside there, put their lives at risk and so on, and to pay them nothing, pay no mind to safety, and pay no mind to environment. And we lose in terms of our assets, we lose in terms of workers who perform invaluable tasks and so on. There's going to be a lot of instability in that environment. I want to say this morning for all of Trinidad and Tobago to hear. The government is not a good regulator. The government is not a good champion of the assets of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Both assets, real assets, beneath the earth, the oil and the gas, and the human resource assets and so on. No defense. So that you would have persons performing tasks, multinationals performing tasks that our own nationals can perform. Could you imagine? Joblessness, workers going home, workers on the hard, on the land, our competent people, while you have multinationals in that particular work environment doing jobs that our nationals can do, and our government stands idly by and allow that to happen like everything else. So we have to, comrades, we have absolutely no choice but to understand the hostile environment within which we operate and to prepare ourselves to call it as we see it, and of course, most importantly, take action to defend those assets and to defend our labor, our invaluable contribution. And there's nobody better than the trade union movement, which trade union movement would have spanned government to government, from the colonial rule to the first incarnation of the PNM, Dr. Eric Williams, and then what that morphed into with George Chambers, and then A.N.R. Robinson, and then from that to the first incarnation of the Honorable Patrick Manning, and then of course Basdeo Pandey, yeah? And then back to Patrick Manning, and then what? Oh yes, Kamla Prasad Bisesa, and then now to a fellow called, I better not say that, the current Prime Minister. But all of them from then to now, one consistent thread, which consistency was never in the interests of all of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But the labor movement, of course, the Alphys Workers Trade Union, have always said and maintained that these assets belong to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Remember, 1979 is the year Texaco must go. Big, big slogan outside here. Campaign, because we felt that that multinational then was not acting in the interests of the people Because Texaco did not belong to Texaco. And it did not belong to the workers who worked Texaco. We saw it then, just as we see it now, it belonged to everybody. And therefore, all of these land and refining assets and so on, the people must benefit. And we want to say this morning, just as we told the multinationals that it did not belong to you, we told Dr. Williams, we told George Chambers, we told Patrick Manning, we told Basdev Pandey, we told Manning again, and we told Kamala Prasad Bisesa, we want to tell Dr. Keith Rowley and his band of misfits that the energy sector does not belong to you, Franklin Kahn, to you and this P&M marauders. No. And we are prepared in the OWTU to prepare those who are in the ownership of it to fight for it. And if you get a job to ensure that you protect these assets in our interests and in the future generations' interests, and you're not doing your job properly, we are prepared to remove you from that job. That is how serious we must be about these assets. And finally, I want to say this morning as we talk about assets, I want to make a particular announcement. Because you see, all that I have said connects to this point, which is that the current government and its prime minister included, and in particular, the lease and farm out minister, is a minister of lease and farm out. If you didn't catch it earlier on in the discourse, he loves that. They are preparing, if they would have their way, to give Petrotrin's assets out to the 1% and to private interests. They are preparing to do that, if they would have their way. So here's how they do it. They sell Petrotrin nationally in the minds of the public as the worst thing since sliced bread. That those assets are bad. That Petrotrin is a burning platform. That Petrotrin is a ward of the state. Totally negating the fact that Petrotrin, not too long ago, would have made significant contribution to this national economy, without which a number of projects would not have been undertaken. And so over a period of a 3-4 year period, some $16+ billion. And then when you look back over an extended period, over $60 billion. But that they would not say. But to make their case, they would say that, listen, Petrotrin owes them some $2 billion in taxes and royalties and so on. But not say that in those same years, Petrotrin would have made payments to the national coffers, albeit not in total. But when you look back, because of the potential that existed, these assets produce revenue for the national coffers so that governments past and present could spend. But these assets today are how they are because past and present governments believe that they own it. Same point I was making, that they own these assets and they can put in control their friends and family. Never mind if they could do the job. That is secondary, or that is not even in their agenda. But that their friends and families to look after their own narrow interests. And as it stands, government comes into office by finances of the political party, and governments, while in office, they find ways to finance the financiers. And they finance the financiers through using these lucrative assets and so on. And therefore, when they make the case out to give away Petrotrin, and in the mind of the public, that Petrotrin is a ward of the state. Petrotrin is no ward of the state. The government don't pay the wages for Petrotrin employees. Let's get that straight. Petrotrin is no likened to no Caroni 1975 Limited. You know. Let's get that straight. As controversial as they would want to make that statement out, let's get that straight. Petroleum has been mismanaged by successive managements and government standing in support of that mismanagement for their own narrow benefit. How do you explain a man who would have done, who I know they say, my mother always tell me, don't ill speak the dead. Don't talk bad about the dead, and she's correct. But so when the media asked me the question upon the death of, God rest his soul, Malcolm Jones, what do you have to say about Mr. Jones? I said just that. My mother always told me, don't ill speak the dead, and therefore I want to rest right there. Because really and truly, he would have contributed to Petroleum's downfall, the truth be told. But instead of recognizing that and having him take accountability, they give the man he was awarded what? An honorary doctorate. That is how they treat with these assets. And the dance and show and party continues. And so today, it is what it is, not because of the workers, you know. The workers who didn't take all of those bad decisions to give out, sell out, and put contractors who don't know what the hell they are doing. But the people's assets, while the union continues to cry out, hey, listen, you are going down the wrong road. Government used their constitutional authority to give to their friends and contracts and so on. And today, Petroleum is in the state that it is in because of successive government, PNM included. Dr. Rowley was in the cabinet of the government, the PNM government, when decisions were made earlier on that contributed to Petroleum's downfall. So he cannot divorce himself or extricate himself from all of those bad decisions. He was part of that. But we are not going to allow them to have their way. And we were fortunate to arrive at a place where, using the empirical evidence, using all of this data that relates to the performance of the company, the potential of the company, to convince those who were given the executive board authority to manage those assets, we were able to convince them, not easily, not only on the strength of our argument, but on the strength of the conviction of all of the workers, we were able to convince them that this company have to be managed in a particular way. Because, you see, to be able to sell it or give it away, they have to send home half the workers. That's their intention, to send home half the workers. But we say not over our dead or alive bodies that will happen. And therefore, here's how this thing is going to work properly. And we gave them the ideas that this company should be divided into 4 operational areas, and those operational areas ought to be resourced so that it can independently focus on their core responsibility and activities and so on, so that we can produce, in the case of the offshore environment, more oil, land more oil for the refinery to process, that the refinery will have to purchase less oil, that we will be able to make bigger profit margins, that the people will be able to benefit more from the company's assets and so on. And we were able to get acceptance of that. So much so, I want to announce this morning that up to late last night, after lengthy discussions, 13 hours discussions with members and representative of the board of Petroleum, this board of Petroleum, we were able to sign a memorandum of agreement detailing how this company is going to be divided, the work that is going to be done, and the period of time, the time frame within which we have to complete this reorganizing of the company. So rest assured, public Trinidad and Tobago, that the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago, if the OWTU have anything to do with it, and for God's sake, we will have everything to do with it, rest assured that it is in good hands, and we will ensure that that company is reorganized for the benefit of all. And let me just, for the records of the media, and I think that we'll make available to the media, copies of this particular memoranda of agreement that we would have signed on to, committing the union and the workers to ensuring the viability, not just survival, sustainability and profitability of this company. Government claim that they have to get finance. They don't have finance to do the work that is required. They cannot finance it. But they have to go to their international finances and so on to borrow money to complete very important projects. Gas to liquid, not gas to liquid plant, ultra low sulfur diesel plant and so on. And that would cost or require some $300 million US. But at the same time, while you're saying that, you're bad-mouthing the same assets. So all the financiers who are listening to you internationally would lend money for assets that you're saying is a burning platform and so on. This is how foolish the politicians are, because their real mission is to not be able to put it back where it belongs, taking its pride and place, making a significant contribution to the national economy. That's not their mission. Their mission is to give it out in peppercorn and so on. So when nobody could finance it, their friends, the 1%, would step in. Well, we were able to get an agreement that says that there will be a working committee comprised of equal numbers representing both the union and the company, working for some 18 months to ensure that those 4 structures are in place and that those structures are properly well-resourced with the proper manpower requirement to be able to deliver, so that we will have a successful Petrotrain. Such is the level of commitment and dedication of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We want to announce this morning. And any politician, any Stuart Young or Stuart Little, we know Stuart Little. You remember Stuart Little? Stuart Little in the movie. He's the fella. Stuart Little now is the fellow who talking in the Prime Minister ears all the time. Stuart Little in the movie, if you remember that, he jump up on top of the table, on top of the cupboard, and he talking through the whole movie. Stuart Little. Stuart Little, any Stuart Little, or any Smiling Franklin Cannon, or any representatives of some financiers of the government want to put their hands on these assets and want to reverse what we would have agreed to, because they do go back on the agreements. Anyone want to take that approach, they have hell to pay. Of course, they have to meet with and treat with and the formidable Oilfields Workers Trade Union. We saw, all of us, we saw here where the government allow, after giving away all our assets, all our gas, all our water, all our natural resources to ArcelorMittal, for years making them one of the greatest, the richest multinational in the world, based on the contribution coming from our assets in Trinidad and Tobago. In Trinidad, right here offshore, East Coast, and all our natural resources, giving them it at peppercorn rate, cheap electricity and so on. The government stood idly by and allowed them to just send home all of those workers. That is the type of governance they want you and I to accept. I want to end this morning, just as I started, by saying that not until the people appreciate what is theirs, not until we are likened to those who know that their grandfather and their grandparents and so their ancestors left this piece of land for them, not until we understand that it is our God-given right, every single one of us, to challenge those who have the responsibility to manage it properly, not until we understand and appreciate that all of these assets belong to all of us, we will continue to allow them to do as they please. But we will have no such luck, because there's a trade union movement of which the oilfields workers trade union is a part. There's a joint trade union movement, of which the oilfields workers trade union is a part. We are prepared to stand up in defense of all of the people, all of the time. I thank you.
Hold the reins of power. When those who labor hold the reins of power, I would like to be in that number. When those who labor hold the reins of... Let me hear the voices. Just close your eyes for a minute. Go to sleep. Wake up the next morning and recognize that the resources no longer belongs to us. We wake up and realize that the resources now belong to a few. Comrades, if nothing else, this morning, from our President General's opening remarks, is to wake us up to the realization that we have no choice but to fight to defend the resources of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We have no choice. It's our history, it's in our blood, and it's our legacy. Thank you, Comrade President General, for those opening that opening statement. I want to continue with the program, and we want to get into a little detail now in terms of some local context work. When you came in and registered, you would have gotten a very fancy magazine. Everybody got one, right? Yeah? All right. This is the product of the hard-working secretariat of TTEITI. And in particular, this sister who has worked very, very hard, very feverishly on making sure that we have this publication. And if you would notice, it's written in a very easy to understand way so that we can use this as a tool as we go out to get others to enjoin our struggle to defend the resources of Trinidad and Tobago. Because that's how I see this as. A tool for us to use to mobilize others to join in the struggle to defend the resources of Trinidad and Tobago. I do not know if that was her intention when they were working on it, but that is what it will certainly be used for. So please join me to welcome Sister Nazira Abdul Haq of the TTEITI Secretariat, who worked on this important publication to take us through.
Thank you very much, Ozzy. All protocols observed. So as Ozzy said, my name is Nazira Abdul Haq, and I am the Policy Coordinator at the TTEITI Secretariat. And before we begin, I just wanted to tell you that last year, at the same breakfast meeting, it was my first day at the Secretariat. So if this would have happened last week, that would have made it exactly 1 year. And I was very excited coming down the road this morning to sing these victory songs, as I call it. I didn't remember all the words, so I just decided to clap along. So I hope that's fine. Yeah. So my task this morning is to explain to you this very interesting title of the latest TTEITI summary report, which you have with you. Champagne history, Morbi reality, adjusting to the new normal. Where we come out with that from? So I will do so very quickly in 4 parts as outlined in the slide before. But before we begin, I just want to explain to you who we are, what we are about. Very briefly, the TTEITI, we are a local group that is part of a global initiative that promotes accountability and transparency in a country's natural resources. And in the case of Trinidad, of course, we speak about oil, gas, and minerals, right? And we do 3 things. I will sum it up into 3 things that we call the 3 R's. 1 is reform. What do we mean by reform? Well, we are concerned with improving systems in the extractive sector to make it work better for the citizens. 2, we reconcile. What do we reconcile? We reconcile what companies say they pay to the government in taxes with what the government say that it receives, right? And any difference there, we try to explain. Well, there must be an explanation for it, right? And finally, the last R is relay. We want to relay these numbers, relay this information to the public, to people like you, the unions, different civil society organizations, so that you can use the information to advance your cause. Also, if you see anything, any room for improvement in the summary report or any information that you would like us to report on or to include in the future, please feel free to let us know and we will do so. So now let's take a look at this Champagne history, Morbi reality thing. So comrades, I hope you don't take offense to me saying comrades. I can't say it anywhere else, so I'm going to say it here. Comrades, we all know the current reality. What is the current reality? Now we've heard this saying, you have champagne taste with Morbi pocket in local context. What do we mean here as it relates to the energy sector? It means that the things that we could have afforded in the past, we can no longer do so. We can't. And that's the stark reality. Why? Take a look at this slide here. So this slide here, it shows us the change in oil and gas revenues from 2008 until 2017. You see that huge fall? So in 2008, Trinidad and Tobago was able to bring in 32.4 billion TT dollars from the oil and gas sector. And now it's what? About 6.53. Is that billions? Yeah? You see that huge drop, but why is that happening? Every household in Trinidad is talking about, oh, we have no oil and gas money, but why? Well, we could attribute it to two things. One, because of low domestic production, and two, because of the sharp drop in global oil and gas prices. So we see on this slide here, we have the West Texas Intermediate price per barrel of oil. Again, 2013 to, let's take 2013 to 2016 and see what's happening. In 2013, things was nice. 97.9 US dollars for every 1 barrel of oil produced. 97. Let's see what started happening in 2014. It's fallen in 14, but just by a little bit. And then 15, wow, look at that, $48.7 per barrel. And then 43.2, it dipped to in 2016. Now I know you're saying, but what she's talking about, boy, look, 2017 and 2018, it's starting to pick up. That means things getting back nice. But I would like to remind us that this is just how economics work. This is a short-term thing, short to medium-term thing. We can't really tell where prices would go. And we need to pay attention to what is happening in the oil and gas market. Particularly, the increase in production of shale oil, so it's flooding the market. So regardless of if we see any short-term changes now, that is not going to be like that for any extended period of time. Yeah? And also with the increase in the demand for alternative fuels, for renewable energy, right? That is also going to contribute to prices not shooting up as we would have seen in 2013. And then what about natural gas prices? We see a similar trend there, right? So 2013, we had 3.7 US dollars per MMBTU of gas. And then you see it started to fall 14, 15, 16, all the way down to 2.5. And then it started to pick up last year into the first 2 months of this year. Anybody could guess why? No guesses? Okay, then I'll tell you. So that increase in the price of gas is really due to that really severe winter weather that they were experiencing in the US, yes? So you have an increase in the demand for gas, for power, and for heating, right? So coming down to summer, we would see how this plays off. I mean, providing there's no heat wave or anything that would, you know, make people want to use more power to power their ACs. And then remember, so I said the situation we are in today as it relates to oil and gas revenue, we attribute it to two things. What are the two? One, price. So we just spoke about price, and the second is production. And I know you all are way more intimate with how production moves more than I am because you are in the sector working on the fields. But you can see that the numbers confirm a decreasing trend in crude oil production as well as in natural gas production. So what are the implications of this Morbi reality that we're talking about? What does that look like for the average Trinidad and Tobagonian? I'm going to focus on 3 things. Of course, there are a lot more that I'm sure you can add here, right? So 1, let's look at cuts in government expenditure. 2, what is the implication on our Heritage and Stabilization Fund? And 3, what about the fuel subsidy? Hot topic. So government expenditure could be split. See it as being able to, you could split it into 3 things. 1, government spends on current, there's current expenditure, capital expenditure, and also spending on transfers and subsidies. When we talk about current expenditure, the first one there with the hand, what is that? Current expenditure would be spending to pay salaries of government workers, anything to run the day-to-day finances of ministries, etc., any minor equipment. And what do we see here? We see a drop in current expenditure from 2014 to 2017. So in 2014, government spending, current expenditure, was about 23 million TT dollars, right? And in 2017, it dropped to 15 million. So you see that? You see how that impacts? And what does that mean? I know we are conjuring up images in our head. And then capital expenditure, as the name implies, this here refers to spending on developing infrastructure, on roads, bridges, spending on acquiring fixed assets. What did that look like over the period when oil prices and gas prices were falling and we had low oil and gas production? The story looks a little bit different. If you all can see the numbers, you could see that in 2014, it was about 6.6 million, right? But then in 2017, we see an 8.2 million. What does that mean? Does it mean that the government is spending more on capital projects? Maybe. I've seen some heads shaking in front. Maybe not. When we look at the numbers closely, we see that this increase is not necessarily due to building more roads, etc., but it is because the government has been repaying loans for capital projects. So that is what sent the number up. And then transfers and subsidies, big one. This refers to spending on things like what? The fuel subsidy, social welfare services, giving NGOs grants, etc., right? And as we can see here, significant cutbacks in payments from 32 million in 2014 to 20.4 million in 2017. And you know before when things was nice, Trinidad is subsidy land, right? So you see how government expenditure is being affected here. Next. Now we just spoke about transfers and subsidies, the rightmost point on the last slide. Our Morbi reality also looks like a gradual removal of the fuel subsidy. I'm not going to say how I feel about that or how you feel about that, but that is just the reality. So the government's idea was they needed to clear off a subsidy liability debt that they owed. They could not have paid it because of high prices, etc. So they sought to gradually remove the fuel subsidy, and by doing that, for the first time, the government was able to clear its subsidy liability, which was as high as 3.8 billion TT dollars. This is money that they owed. Their contribution to the subsidy, it was as high as 3.8 billion in 2013. And at the end of August 2016, they were able to clear that off because they gradually removed the fuel subsidy. And also too because of lower prices. Now what about our Heritage and Stabilization Fund, HSF? We hear this plenty times, right? What is that? So I want us to see the HSF as the country's piggy bank, of excess oil and gas revenues. And what you're using this money for two things: for rainy days like now, and also for future generations. Of course, there's a huge discussion about, well, when does future even start? But we're not going to go into that today. Yeah? So you see this skinny starving pig here? Do you all think that that's what's happening? And our funds shriveling up and drying up? Let's see on the other slide. So let's start at the bottom left, 2014, all the way up to 2017. And what this slide shows is the value of our HSF. How much money we have in the fund, right? But it's getting fatter and bigger as we go up. Then we just say more be reality. So that means everything have to be hard, times hard. So in 2014, the value of the fund was 5.5 billion US dollars, going up 15, 5.7, 16, 5.6 it fell. But then 5.8 in 2017, and if you look good, 17 is more than 14. But how is that possible? How is that possible given two things? One, 2013 was the last year that the government deposited money into the HSF. And you're supposed to do this once you have excess oil and gas revenues, just keeping that there, every quarter. So the last time the government did this was 2013. Plus, you see those 2016 and 17 where we have the numbers in the red brackets? Those are actually withdrawals from the fund. Because time's so hard, the government had to withdraw from the HSF to finance the budget. And this is a legally allowed thing. I see hands going up like, what madness is this? That is something that can be done. Yeah? It's authorized. It's legal. Well, the reason why the value of the fund is increasing is because we take some of the monies in the fund and we invest it in several US and non-US assets. So luckily for us, our investments are paying back, but this may not always be the case. And also, what if this year and next year and the year after, and we keep continuing and we keep having to withdraw from the fund, what's going to happen to our HSF? Would we have any more savings left for rainier days and for future generations? So let's talk about weathering this storm. So we point out all this bad news. What we say now, what's the future looking like? Well, weathering the storm will require action on the part of government and on the part of people. And when I say people, I mean citizens like us. Your wife, your mommy, daddy, children, aunt, uncle, co-worker. And I don't mean any old regular action like government, you do your business and we do our business. It has to be a collaborative effort. Otherwise, when I try to do something, you're just going to offset it and vice versa. Yeah? So let's look at the people. What kind of things we have to do? Well, for one, as we will see in this report, we need to start thinking about adjusting our expectations and changing our spending habits. What do we mean by that? Nobody wants to do this because we are accustomed to champagne history, right? So my male comrades, how we could do that? Instead of spending money to carry your significant other out, your girlfriend, your wife out every Friday after work because she's feeling, you know, for a little lime, cook up something nice and impress her. That way you could save, right? So you're gaining points and you're saving. And for our female comrades, I have a thing, I like to go to Pennywise, and although I have one set of hair products and deodorant left over and all that, I still go and buy it. So for me, that is a way I could adjust my spending habits. All right, comrade. Also, we have to start thinking about paying. We may at some point have to pay the real price for utilities. These things, water is heavily subsidized, electricity is heavily subsidized. These are all costs that we can't control. So don't go in the living room when you have the AC running in the bedroom whole day because you're watching TV outside, because that is a cost that has to be paid, right? And then secondly, for the citizens, and I like this one, we need to get serious about holding the government accountable in how our extractive revenues are being allocated and on policy decisions as it relates to the oil and gas sector. Yeah? And I like to talk about, I mean, this one is close to my heart because I lived abroad for some time, and coming back home, it was like the idea of development abroad and here is like two completely different things. For me, I like to see development as relieving what I call pain points. And what are pain points? It sounds just like what it says. Things that causing frustration, headache, you can't take it every day. So these, for me, frustration in traffic, because I live in the east and I have to go to Port of Spain and back every day in traffic, inadequate water delivery, and also my fear of getting some non-communicable disease. Did you know that 84% of the persons that die in NCRHA facilities, they die from non-communicable diseases? That's like diabetes and hypertension, etc. And it would take about 3 million to improve access to treatment for these non-communicable diseases if you were to go into communities with it. So if we have all these ideas about how money should be spent as citizens, would it not make sense to use our creativity to do our proper research, work with our networks, come up with some solutions and put it forward to the government? And if what we were doing before wasn't working, then try something new. Yeah? And on the side of the government, what would the government have to do? Remember, I said it's a collaborative thing. You can't just expect the people to tighten their belts, and on the next end, nothing is happening. So on the side of the government, I like to talk about efficiency of spend. Do we actually do any cost-benefit analyses in Trinidad and Tobago? So I say, okay, I want to spend how much of $1 million on a hospital as opposed to a highway. How do I know that that is the best thing that I should be doing? How do I know that it's really going to benefit more citizens by doing X as opposed to Y? This is something that we need to think about, especially given our current morbid reality where we have no money. And also spending to relieve pain points. So you see how that collaboration comes here? If government is thinking, okay, I want to spend efficiently, I want to spend more to be more efficient in my spending, then you have citizens here saying, well, these are some ways in which doing that. You see how we work hand in hand. Another role of the government is to improve revenue collection, which it has been working on. So there are opportunities to do that, to capture more royalties from the mining sector by doing PSC audits, improving VAT collection. Also facilitating participatory democracy, not just saying that Trinidad and Tobago is a democratic society because we elect a government in office, etc., but stay true to the meaning. So if citizens are putting in research, etc., that needs to be facilitated and accommodated on the other end as well. And finally, efforts towards diversification in areas that are net foreign exchange earners. Also, we can't put all of the burden on laborers. The private sector also has to pick up some slack as well. So work towards developing the private sector, etc. So in closing, and I hope that was short, I don't know what my time is like. I want to encourage you to please go online, share this. It's on our webpage, like our Facebook page for all those of you who are into social media. And thank you very much.
I think we can give Sister Nazira Abdul Haq another round of applause for her presentation delivery. I just want to say two things before I bring on the next speaker. In your presentation on fuel subsidy, we could say a few things well. We could say one thing about that. The Oilfield Workers Trade Union have always taken the position that they should have never touched the fuel subsidy. And here's why. Here's why. And that is our clear position. If the resources belong to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, until you find another mechanism, there is absolutely no mechanism in place that will ensure that every single citizen, as UPG always mentioned, whether it's the single mom who have to send the children to school, whether it's the vagrant, whether it's, no matter who, it is the only mechanism to ensure that every citizen, regardless of who you are, can benefit from the resources. And until you do that, should never touch the fuel subsidies. You don't even have to own a vehicle to benefit from that fuel subsidy. In fact, when you put on your lights and everything, that's increased cost of living once you remove the fuel subsidy. So your life itself would be changed. So our position very clear on that. And I think there was I do like the slide of the skinny pig. Skinny pig, and then you have the other fatter pigs. I just want to say, not on that report, but it have some other people in this country fattening up like that pig, you know. Ansa McCall declared, I'm just saying another sentence, full stop, new sentence, new paragraph. Ansa McCall declared in this hard time, where all we had a band we belly, where the pig skinny, $648 million in after-tax profit. That piggy bank getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And in closing, I think your point on participatory democracy is absolutely clear. And I'm happy that you were able to present what is true participatory democracy and not what a few, was it last week, what a minister tried to pass off as a definition of participatory democracy, saying that participatory democracy, or in a participatory democracy, the best entity to manage the affairs, notwithstanding NGOs and civil society, is the government. But I'm glad that you were able to clarify what is true participatory democracy, because we all are shareholders, and therefore we all have a right to participate and to be involved in the decision making as it regards to the resources of Trinidad and Tobago. So I think we could give Sister Hack another round of applause for that insightful, thought-provoking presentation. Next presentation, in that we have so far published 4 TTEITI reports, and we're in the process, I say we because OWTU is a member of the steering committee, in the process of publishing the 5th TTEITI report. It is not yet completely published, but we are the first audience to see what is considered the provisional data. So this is the provisional data which it will have to be signed off, reconciled, and by the steering committee and so on. So we are very fortunate. And to present this, I know he's wanted this designation for some time, but I heard that I say I can't do it. Only the President General could do so. And I heard him earlier give you the designation. So join me, and I think it's a pleasure to welcome to the mic for yet another year, and I'm sure for other years to come. Please join me in welcoming Comrade Shoin Long.
Good morning, all protocols observed. It's a great pleasure for me to be here again for the 3rd time to present on you getting the first sneak peek of our latest report, which should be published a little later this month. So today I will just introduce you very briefly to what the EITI is about, highlight some of our focus points, give you examples of how the data can be used, and give you a few final takeaways, okay? So as the name suggests, the EITI focuses on promoting high standards of transparency and accountability. The principles at the heart of the EITI require countries to publish accurate data on how much you earn, what are the tax contributions of the extractive companies, whether it's oil, gas, mining companies, how does that compare to what governments say they receive. The initiative also promotes how you reconcile the production of companies versus what governments say is produced, focuses on revealing who are the real owners behind companies that work in your country, that develop these resources on your behalf. Gives, importantly, I think this is the most important part of the initiative, that it gives concrete recommendations on how you can improve revenue collection, how you can improve how you manage your data, the audit and assurance, etc., how well you audit your information. Another key point is that in each country that participates in the EITI, you must have a multi-stakeholder group set up to govern the initiative. You could see in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, it's a tripartite group. Good. All right, I'm a bit tall. It's a tripartite group consisting of civil society players, government agencies, and even extractive companies. So on our board, you will have companies like BP, BHP, you'll have the Energy Chamber, Chambers of Commerce, etc. But on the other hand, you have civil society. You have the OWTU, you have Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, you have Cropper Foundation, network of NGOs for the advancement of women. On the government side, you'll have your regulatory agencies, whether the Ministry of Energy, your Board of Inland Revenue, state enterprises, whether Petroleum, National Quarries, NGC, and so on. So you get a flavor of the mix. I know a lot of you would want to say, but if all of these competing interests sit around a table, how do you get any decisions made? How do you get things done? But I'm pleased to announce that we've met 91 times over the past 7 years. We've never had to vote on an issue. So it shows that in Trinidad and Tobago that different competing interests could sit around a table and agree on our way forward for things. I think this is an important point as well that we want to make. The process is relatively simple. We hire an independent auditor to review tax payments from companies. So companies fill out a template. They say, okay, this is what I would have paid in taxes, different type of taxes. The government would then fill out a template and send back to this auditor as well. But each of the parties, whether company or government, they must provide supporting information. So you must provide your audited financial, you must provide receipts of what you actually, what you paid, etc. So the auditor would then trace and track these payments, compare and contrast and say, okay, what is the difference between what governments say they receive versus what companies say they pay? There's always a difference, but the key is that we don't have any unidentified differences. So there's no instance, for example, where you could say, well, we can't account for money that we received from an extractive company. I think that's important. In other countries, you have money where that goes missing, basically. In Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have that experience. The reasons for the differences most times is foreign exchange fluctuations, as well as timing differences. A company makes a payment on September 29th, but it goes into the government accounts in October. That's a new financial year. So those are the main reasons for any discrepancy that we find between the figures, which is important. Again, the EITI process doesn't only look at, okay, how much we receive. It looks at allocation. How does this money go from the treasury to the citizens? What are the mechanisms that you have in place for it to go to a local government authority, etc.? As Nazira pointed out before, our focus is on the 3 R's. The reconciliation, I explained it already. That will highlight any revenue leakage or any gaps in how much you receive. The reform part talks about your institution. How do you improve your institutions? How do you improve systems in the Ministry of Energy? How do you improve systems in the Board of Inland Revenue? And of course, the relays is key. You would have our reports, our summary report, breaking down the information to you in what we'd like to call digestible chunks. We want to provide the citizens with as much information as possible to inform the discussion, right? So how can EITI data be used? Again, different players use the information in different ways. The data, as we said, can drive fiscal reform. If, for example, you see, okay, I'm receiving X amount of money in this particular year, after I would have changed my tax systems, my structures, the allowances I give to grant to companies, etc. When you look at that data, you could say, okay, this can drive me to probably change my whole fiscal and tax system for the state to receive more money. It also provides, a key thing is that in Trinidad we'd have a trust issue. You know, you say, but is this information accurate? In our case, because we have an independent auditor, You can basically trust the information. Everything is explained in terms of the figures, in the numbers, sorry. And it provides, with this type of independent information, you provide different analysts, you provide policymakers, whether union, etc., with information that they can trust. The consultants for the gas master plan use the data to guide government policy and give some recommendations. It's the only place that you could get that level of data. You can go in our reports and see what BP paid to the government. You can go to our reports and see what Petroleum paid to the government. What is the difference between what Petroleum paid versus what government say they receive? Again, the information has been used by our comrades in the OWTU, as well as Petroleum, to make their cases when they were going through negotiation. And importantly, I like to say that this information, it really empowers civil society. This is information that you would not have every day of the week coming before you. This is information that you can use. You can see, okay, where the money is allocated. Is it allocated in the best possible way? You can start asking those questions when you get the data. And again, if you live in a fence line community, you can say, okay, well, I live where this resource is being produced. What does a company that is working in my area, what do they contribute to state revenue? And then you ask questions about, what does this mean for me in terms of my roads, my health services, etc. How is that feeding back to me as a citizen? So this section here I will just run through very briefly. It highlights some of the numbers. Again, it tells the same story of what is going on in the economy. The production share contracts, there's a share profit that the country gets. That's our share. You would see it's declining over the period that we've reported on. Next slide. Out of this share of profit, it's very important to understand that government will pay the taxes due on behalf of its partners. So if government is partnering with BHP and another company, let's say company X, the government out of that share of profit would have to pay on behalf of BHP and company X the taxes. So out of that share of profit,